You know how many employees you have, you know how many you're going to hire, you know your vacancy rate, you know your time to fill, and you know your engagement rate. You can do the math around lost productivity in terms of dollars with all of that data.
Welcome to another episode of Higher Learning with me, your host, Oz Rashid. This is the show where we learn from executive and founders about what they uniquely see that others don't when it comes to identifying talent. If this is your first episode, welcome. I think you're going to love it. If this is a many-time episode and you're a long-time supporter, thank you so much for that. Everybody, please subscribe on Apple and Spotify and give us a high rating. That helps the podcast out quite a bit. Today, we are joined by a very special guest. We are joined by Lorna Hagen, Chief People Officer and Executive Coach. Lorna, how the heck are you?
I am doing fantastic. Happy holidays. How are you?
I'm doing well. Now, this is going to come out well after Thanksgiving, but we both just celebrated. It's the Monday back after the holiday. I'm sure you had your fill of turkey and stuffing.
Way too much. Let's put it that way.
Love it. Well, good news is there's no other big holidays right around the corner with lots of eating and drinking, so you should be good for a while. That's why everybody goes back to the gym in January 1st, right?
That does not exist for a Puerto Rican. We started eating at Halloween and we don't end till mid-January. So
Oh man, well then I'm coming up to you around second week of January so I can keep my eating going. Um, let's start here. You're an accomplished HR executive career. You've worked for Namely and Taylor, iHeartMedia, really big brands, but you left the executive world to become an executive coach and you started Win Consulting. I'm just interested, what led to this move for you? Was this like a need or did you just get tired of the corporate world?
yeah.
Or has this been something you've been itching to do for a while?
Yeah. So honestly, all three. So the idea of consulting had been on my mind for years. I had done some really great work with, at the time, Willis Towers Watson. And I had thought about joining them a few times and they asked. And it just didn't make sense with where my family was at the time. And then COVID happened. And everybody in my job had um, multiple sleepless nights. And the thought was, I can help one company. For me, the thought was, I can help one company or I can try and help several. And how do I do that? And for us and my partner Wei and I, the real idea was, um, companies are really struggling with what to do on employee productivity, and CEOs claim and say that culture is an issue, but they don't actually know what that means. They don't know how to define it, they don't know how to measure it, and they don't know how to set up successful outcomes off of any interventions, activities, or projects they might start to do at their organizations. And so for us, the idea of Win was, how do we start to help post COVID really help CEOs and their executive teams understand how employee productivity is the key. And for us, it's not through budget cuts or efficiency, it's all around what kind of clarity do you give your organizations and what kind of connection do they build? Because the belief for us is that those two things are what strengthens employee discretionary effort. And discretionary effort has a direct impact on your EBITDA. So that was for me, the real reason why we started Win. And then the other thing around executive coaching is I love that piece of my chief people officer job. Like, how can I work one-on-one or with the primary team, with the executive team, to really help us move the needle on the goals that we needed to achieve? And then how does that support trickle down into the organization?
Yeah, so as a chief people officer, was that one of your big remits or wins when you were leading these organizations in terms of driving employee productivity? Like, I love that from this perspective that everybody in HR is really should be aligned with the business and the business's objectives. And what more way can you show your impact on the bottom line than taking employee productivity from here to here? Are those usually wide sweeping changes? Are they a lot of small changes? Like, how does that work in practice inside of an organization?
So the first thing that I'll say is, it should be part of the remit of a chief people officer, but it often isn't. And it's
Mm.
because you frequently have leaders or peers that don't know how to make that connection, which is ironic, between employee productivity and business results. And so they really think of the chief people officer as kind of the one dimensional group that's going to hire some people for me, do some employee relations activities, fire the people that I don't want anymore, and then run that survey every year. Right? That's a really one dimensional view of the job. But the job really is you are a business partner to the CEO of the organization. And hopefully, your best friend is the CFO. And in that case, your job is to find profitability. And so I always say that my job was to find profits through people. And so that's really what I think that job should be. And for every CPO to really start to make that link. And this is basic math, the way that we look at it at Win, which is you know how many employees you have, you know how many you're going to hire, you know your vacancy rate, you know your time to fill, and you know your engagement rate. You can do the math around lost productivity in terms of dollars with all of that data. And very few people do it. I had a meeting with a CFO of a fintech company a few months ago, and I showed him the math based on the data for his organization, and he basically said, "How come my finance team and my head of HR haven't shown this to me?" And it's because they're not thinking about it that way, right? They're
Mm.
so busy trying to put out fires frequently that they really start to lose track of, okay, the long game is X. How do we start to look at those numbers and how do we do the math behind it?
Oh, I really like that. So it's been my experience that, and I haven't met very many 8 or 9 year olds that are thinking about, I want to be in HR one day. Just handling employee relations and payroll just like really stirs my soul. And that's what my career is going. I find that most people kind of fall into HR. It's not necessarily intentional. Tell us about your journey into HR. Was it intentional or was it something you fell into?
So I used to say it was the accidental career. I do not say that anymore. I think it's very intentional. So I went to school for hospitality management, and I thought by now I would have, a chain of restaurants. And that was my passion, and it still is. So what I realized is I just didn't like the work. Meaning the grind of hospitality is it's unrelenting. And so what I realized is as I came out of school and I did that job honestly just for 1 year, where I was spending all of my time was on employee relations. Now I work for a major Fortune 100 food service organization, and almost all of it was 90% employee relations and 10% creativity around, well, what are we going to do in these kitchens? How are we going to serve our clients? How do we think about hospitality and service? And it was a lot of time spent with union shop stewards and negotiating, and somehow that just started to build upon each other. And I moved into an HR role after a few years full time, and that was 3 years out of college. So I will say for the most of my career, I have been in HR. So it was very planful. Um, and I remember thinking at one point, okay, in order to get to that head job, what I really need to do is how do I go into centers of excellence? Because I came up as an HR business partner. And I've seen some research from Tucker Stone, which is a search firm, that said the most successful CPOs are the ones that have grown up as generalists, but then went into centers of excellence. And so the first minute I had that opportunity, and that was at Dow Jones, I went from an HR business partner to run compensation, recruitment, and L&D globally for Dow Jones. And it was the best experience I could have had. And I did that for 3.5 years. And really, while Dow was going through a huge technology transformation, News Corp had just bought that company. I was able to go over there because I was at a different News Corp company. And we did an entire transformation of that business, inclusive of the HR department, of people, process, and technology. And so that's really how I broadened my portfolio and eventually got to that CPO role.
I love that. And I got to pull a thread here because there's something you said that stood out to me. So if you would have opened up this chain of restaurants, I mean, what type of food would it have been? Did you have a concept in mind or no?
Honestly, so I had a perfectly lovely, i.e., great time in college. My dream at that point was I wanted a chain of restaurants like Zuma. Have you ever been to Zuma?
Yeah, I've been to Zuma.
Okay,
Yep.
so
They
that's
have one
that
down
was
here
what
in
I wanted.
Miami. It's incredible. Okay, got it. I love how you articulated that, though. I had a very lovely time in college. I also had a very lovely time in college. So I love that. So I love the story. I love how you got to where you go. I really, really, what resonated with me with what you said was the best CPOs are the ones that start as a generalist and eventually go into the COE. And it sounds like you definitely have not only believed that, but lived that. So really, really amazing. Let's talk about HR leaders in general, because you've seen a lot. You've been one throughout your career. You said to me that the best HR leaders need to be comfortable in the gray area. What did you mean by that?
You are balancing so many demands, so many constituencies, so many personalities, and everything is emotional, right? So when you're faced with a decision, almost always 80% of that is made up of the emotions that other stakeholders bring to that decision. 20% of that is data, right? And the data is going to influence probably the outcome, but how you handle the emotions of the decision is really what's going to make your reputation and solidify your relationships with that team. And so you have to be really, really comfortable being able to make decisions that sometimes you don't agree with, but the data will guide you. Or the opposite, the data might guide something, but the right thing to do is a different solution. And that to me is always great. There is almost never a time when you and your leadership team are going to align and agree on something 100% of the time. Same thing goes for company strategy, right? So, do you have the ability to help that team commit and move in the right direction, even though you might disagree? So, that to me, that's all the skill set of navigating in the gray.
That makes sense. And listen, there's been a lot of like really good takeaways here for either HR leaders already in the seat or on their way up to being the chief people officer. But I want to talk about the business side too, because I think what's important is that you said this has to be harmonious. This has to be tied together. The business has responsibilities to HR as well. And we both know that business leaders at times will complain about how HR, I've heard them say hall monitor or like hand slapper, or, and, you talked about the employee relations being the early aspect of your career. Yet many business leaders don't know what to do with a strategic HR leader that understands their world, that understands their business. What would you recommend to those business leaders listening on how they can work with these brilliant, strategic, business focused HR minds and get the most out of them and empower them to be ultimately successful?
Yeah. You know, and you might get to this, but I was, in the prep for this, one of the things that I've been very lucky to be in different industries. And one of the things that I love to do when I'm going into a new role is say to my peers, what book, article, research, anything, what would you have me read so that I either understand your function or the industry really well? And I would say the same thing to business leaders. Ask your head of HR, what book should I read so that I understand what your day to day looks like? No one has ever asked me that question, not one business leader. And I've been on 4 executive teams.
Okay, well, we're going to do it here. What's the book?
Oh my God, there are so many books. In fact, I have a bunch of them over there. I love the One Page Talent Manager by Mark Efron. I
Okay.
love It's Not the How or the What, but the Who by Claudio Fernandez Araoz. I think he's brilliant. Hold on, what else do I have over here? Chief HR Officer by John Boudreau. I mean, read anything about, from John Boudreau. Like, it's like, right? I mean, there are so many people and there's so many basic things. Have your head of HR go get some research from Gartner, right? That Gartner has a best in class CHRO framework that is a one pager. And if your colleagues are curious, you could have an hours long conversation about, well, what do all these sections of this house mean? Right? That's an incredible way to start a relationship with somebody.
I really love that. I think that's an amazing. I've never even heard of that concept before, but I wonder how many people off the top of their head would have books in mind that describe their function, their way of working, their industry. You've got 3 or 4. That's incredible. I'm going to have to dig into those books. I'll better understand Lorna. I'll better understand strategic and business focused HR. Really great advice there. If you don't mind, we're going to talk about hiring in a minute because we're going to dive even deeper into the HR talent side. But I'm going to take it in a little bit of a unique direction right now.
Okay.
I couldn't let you get away telling me this without me asking you about it. You recently started ballroom dancing. That is definitely a first for this show. Why did you decide to do this? Was this something that you wanted to always do, or well, what happened? How did you get involved with ballroom dancing? What does it do for you?
I did one of those funny things that a lot of people did during the pandemic, and I left the city and I moved to the suburbs. um, and the suburbs are for many people, but they're not for everyone. And so I was just looking like, what is there to do? What can I do out here that's not a strip mall? I live in the land of strip malls right now. And so I was meeting a friend for lunch one day, and I drove by this Fred Astaire dance studio. And I called them up the next day, and they said, "Yeah, sure, come in for 2 complimentary lessons." And I loved it. And so here's what it does. One is it really, well, you're off your phone, right? You actually now are fully focused on thinking about your your presentation, but I don't mean like physically, right? The dancing part of it. I mean, am I present emotionally? Am I present physically? How am I listening to direction? Am I absorbing what's happening? It's one of the best experiences that I've had to disconnect from technology and just be with myself, but really you're with a partner. So that's one thing. Like the complete separation from your phone is amazing. The other is the trust that you build with another human being that you've never met before is incredible, especially if you're the female dancer, right? Because they're gonna twirl you and they're gonna throw you, and you just need to go with it, right? And it is an absolute, for people that have control tendencies, it's a really magical way to start to chip away at that thing and let go. And so for me, it's taught me patience. It's taught me to be in the moment. It's taught me to be really present. So, and I see that actually going into other parts of my life, especially parenthood.
Well, it sounds almost meditative, like in terms of like the being physically present and emotionally present. What's the end game with this? Like, do you go to competitions, or like how does it work? Like, bring me into
So
the
a
ballroom
lot of
dancing world.
people do. My good friend Debbie does this. She lives out in Manhattan Beach, and she also. I went with her once. I was visiting her a few years ago, and I went to one of her classes to watch. Um, so she was also a little bit of an inspiration. She is an incredible competitor. That's not my end game. My end game is I just want to go home to Puerto Rico, go to a few clubs, go to a few bars, and have a good time and dance. But yeah, I mean, some people love it in the competitive. So I don't have one
Wow.
competitive bone in my body, so it's not that's not the appeal of it to me.
Yeah, I feel like I'd go into it like with this idea of being present and away from technology, and then the competitive monster that lives inside me would like you'd see me on Dancing with the Stars eventually. Let me ask a question real quick though. Do you watch Dancing with the Stars, and are you critiquing everybody on there?
So I don't, but I would be the president of the Alana Mar fan club if there is
Okay.
one, and so I keep tabs of her on Dancing with the Stars through Instagram.
I love that. All right, we're gonna get to our lightning round in a little bit. I don't know if I got enough ballroom dancing questions, but I got some things in your background experience I'm gonna dive into. So stay tuned. We're gonna come
Okay.
back to that. But here's what the deal. All our incredible sponsors, including LaCroix and Celsius, they want us to talk about hiring. We don't actually have any sponsors, but I drink a lot of LaCroix on video. So if you're listening, guys, let me know. We got to dive into the talent attraction side, the talent acquisition side, the stuff that I'm passionate about, the stuff that it sounds like you're passionate about. I'd like to understand this because you've hired for your team, but you've also kind of set the tone for what hiring should look like in organizations of really large scale and sizes.
Yeah.
Um, let's start here. Core hiring philosophy. What's something that when I ask you that, what comes to mind?
I, the first thing is hire slowly, fire quickly.
Ooh, okay.
Take your
Give me more detail.
time and build the right plan with the right people to find as close to a right candidate as you possibly can. And that's a strategy. Like you're building a strategy. People who decide to open a rec because Oz just gave in his resignation, let's go fill that role. That's a mistake, right? The
Mm,
first question is, do we need that role? The second question is, do we need the role in the way that it's being done now? Do we need
mm,
the role here? Like there are so many ways to redesign. You should constantly be thinking about what is the opportunity that this vacancy now allows us. Very few people do that.
Okay, so there's a couple different threads I want to pull down there. You worked at Fortune 100. You mentioned it earlier. You worked at Fortune 500. You worked at these very big brands. These companies get to the size they are because they have kind of these like legacy mindsets, and here's our job profile and archetype, and here how we go to market. What happens if you meet resistance from like, well, because I think that's brilliant. Do we need this role? Do we need the role in the way that it is? What happens when you get pushback from other people on like, nah, that sounds like a lot of work. Let's just go refill this VP of supply chain position. How do you help them understand the importance of that?
Um, so if you're a generalist, one I will say to you, if you're in TA, your business partner is your best friend. So you go in together, right? Don't If you're a business partner and you send in your talent acquisition partner to go fill a role because someone has left, or there is just a net new job, and you don't go with them, you've lost credibility with your clients, I think. So that's one, right? You're kind of the beacon of that strategy, and how do you design it? So make sure that you're in the room. And for our TA listeners, make sure that your business partner is in the room. Because guess what? It's much harder to say no to two people than to one person. So have an aligned strategy, know what you're going to ask. Your business partner should have an idea of what the ultimate strategy is for that division or department. And you and TA need to start formulating your questions around that. So I think that's one of the most important things. You have a partnership on the HR team, use it. That's really, really important.
Ooh. Okay, now let's also talk about fire quickly, because that is another really important aspect in the second part of what you said, which I imagine there's a lot of business leaders who are nodding their head. I've heard that advice before, but gosh, it's a lot easier to say than it is in practice. How do you put effective parameters in place to know that right timing, to know you're checking in, to know, that, hey, this isn't the right fit for this person, and kind of decouple the emotional component of it just to make it strictly from a business imperative perspective?
So there you never decouple the emotion, because what
Hmm.
happens is, especially if you're a hiring manager, you have made a selection. But what the data says, and I mentioned this book, it's not the how or the what. If you read this book, and I love this book, Claudio, who had worked at Egon Zehnder for decades, says 50% of the time you're going to get it wrong. 50% of the time you're going to get it wrong. So even the people that consider themselves the best leaders are not immune to that statistic. And so one is, if you know that your failure rate is half, then you need to make sure that you've really built a almost a foolproof onboarding. Like, no one should be left alone in their first 90 days, right? So how do you think about, and obviously so much of this is dependent on level and company and location, but you can reach anyone at any time. And so, what companies are doing in order to ensure that there is stickiness of onboarding, that there's understanding of strategy, and that there's clarity of goals and metrics in the first 90 days is probably the most important thing you're going to do. I'll give you a perfect example of where I failed at this. I had an employee who worked for me at Ann, and then at On Deck, and then I brought her to one of my last companies. Um, and her onboarding didn't go well, right? And ultimately, it's my team, it's my responsibility. She was a few layers below me in that role, and we really kind of had to unravel, where did this fall down, because she's a star and still is a star, but in that environment somehow. Now my where I'm ending with this is that environment failed her, not she failed us. But we didn't onboard her properly, right? We didn't make it sticky, and we didn't make it clear. And so the thing that I told you about, when our philosophy is all around clarity and connection, we didn't give her that clarity and connection, and it didn't work.
Oh, that's such a great story. Fit matters so much. The Claudio quote on 50% of the time you're going to get it wrong is literally what I've based my entire career on. Because when I first started doing my own hiring, right, when I was in technology as a project manager, I realized that if I looked at the people that were brought into our organization over a year or two, and I was thinking about how their managers would rate how they were doing, that it was at 50% at best. And the way that we've structured MSH in terms of our recruitment services is that we don't look at it as get the person hired, first day invoice, you're done. We look at it as that first year anniversary, and would that candidate take the job again? Would you hire them again? Are they up for promotion? And I'm happy to say that we've run the metrics. We go from 50%, we take our hires at 76% on high success rate on that 1 year anniversary. And now the software we're building in Aon is doing the exact same thing. And I hope to have a similar percentage on that and the effectiveness of hiring. And I think it's a very, very different mindset, right? In terms of I need to make a hire, I got the butt in the seat, boom, I can move on to something else versus I need to not just make a good hire, I need to make the right hire and somebody that's going to alleviate the work on myself, my team, be productive, fit our culture, drive things going forward. That is a win. That is why you need to put the time and the preparation and the thought and intention into proper hiring so you don't have to fire quickly,
No.
right? That's why when you put that diligence up front, you're going to get it right more often than not. And when I'm talking about it, I'm not just saying 50%, I'm saying 60, 70%. I genuinely believe because people don't fully understand what success looks like in these roles or what the requirements are, the data points that matter, and thus can't now map a process back to identifying those skills in people is the biggest reason why it's 50-50 right now for most people in companies and not much higher. Go ahead.
I agree. And to add to that, part of, imagine if companies did this. 3 steps. One is be much more selective in your pool. How can you be more selective in your pool? If you're already implementing data, if you have data inside your company to tell you who's been successful, who's not been successful. So that's one thing. So how do you get even more selective instead of like, spraying and praying that you're going to get candidates? That's one. The other is make it really clear to your candidates this interview process will entail some kind of project. I want you to be prepared. If you go, X number of levels or rounds, there will be a project. Make it clear from the beginning. Have people self select out if they don't want that. A lot of people get freaked out that they're giving away free labor. So, fine. So, make that clear from the beginning so that you can assess the way that somebody thinks. Um, the last thing is several years ago, I went through a round at a large Fortune 100 company, 9 interviews. During that time, at least 4 different people talked differently about the job.
Hmm.
Different goals, different metrics, different expectations. There was no clarity on what they were hiring for. And so, what I would say is, I love this idea of have a selective aristocracy on your roster, right? This came from that book as well. 3 people that really understand the job, that know the goals, that get the metrics, that can set the expectations for the candidate. And you find these people by looking at a batting average. Like, what is the hiring batting average of people that you have put on your slates of interviews? You should have that information, right? And so get that batting average, find the best of the best, give them a little bit more money, and make sure that they're part of the way that you recruit so that you inch above your 50%.
Yeah, I mean, we didn't talk about this before. You're dropping so much gold here, and I love what you're saying because, and we've got to demo this for you. But this is exactly what our software does. It looks at who has the highest hit rates on the people that they've hired. How do we drive alignment in the role? Because the other problem is, and I love selective aristocracy, when you have 4 people, right, who are misaligned, that means that you didn't sit down at the beginning and talk about what the definition of success is in
Yes.
this role, what this looks like, and now we got to be consistent and validate. And we've got to have transparency in our interview process and not have it be a black box. Because I got to tell you, that is probably one of the biggest reasons why people don't take roles, or that when they get in the role they realize they took the wrong one because 5 different people have 5 different ideas of what this should look like, and now you're getting pulled in all these directions. You're serving so many different masters, and you're not ultimately successful to anybody because you're trying to please everybody. And I think that lack of alignment, that lack of transparency, and then not understanding who are best at this and giving them more opportunity to be involved in that process, those are just a few of the many reasons why hiring is at a 50-50 hit rate and not
Well,
higher. So
the other thing is nobody knows how to interview, right? No one has actually The curiosity is at an all-time low. And in that example that I gave you of the 9 interviews, some people were checking their watches during the interview, or they were double booked, my interview plus another meeting. And so what happens is, bias comes into everything. And this is a new bias that I heard about, which is the bias of what you see is all there is. And it was a Daniel Kahneman thing. And could you imagine? I mean, we've all been guilty of this. What you see is all there is. If you had that group of 3 sharpshooting interview panelists, and then they would start to ask at the end, what else do we need to know? What do we need to know about these candidates? What do we need to know about this role? What do we need to know about the market so that we can make a sound hiring decision? But the debriefs don't go that way. They go this way. Okay, Lorna, what did you think about Oz? Well, I like the way he answered this question, but not how he answered this question. Well, guess what?
Mm.
The entire interview process kicked off 3 months ago, and we're actually not reevaluating where we are in the market based on this job, right? And so that what you see is all there is such an interesting idea to me. And how do we get beyond that? We get beyond that by teaching people to be more curious and to ask better questions.
So, Daniel Kahneman, that's Thinking Fast and Slow. Is
Yeah.
that his book?
Yeah.
Oh, God, what a great book that is. I really love that. That's a great bias. Not one that I had built into our kind of architecture there. Very, very smart. I like that.
Finding the right talent for your team doesn't have to be a struggle. Meet Aon Hire, the world's first hiring experience management platform designed to transform the way you hire. Powered by AI, Aon Hire takes the hassle out of every step in the process. From smart resume analysis to customized interview questions, it saves you time, money, and effort. Plus, with real-time insights from every interview, you can quickly identify top candidates, reduce turnover, and stay on budget. And forget about note-taking, Aon Hire takes care of that for you. Ready to revolutionize your hiring process? Visit aonhire.com and get started today.
So you mentioned you had a bad interview experience where it was, 4 people that were misaligned. Do you have a memorable interview experience that maybe was more positive, or maybe it was
Wait. Oh,
even
I
worse?
do, but let me actually, that's not the worst. Here's the worst one, which was
Okay,
fascinating.
tell me.
I worked at the Wall Street Journal at the time, and I went to interview with an airline, and I was really interested in this role and completely aligned with the head of HR and the CFO. But I go to meet the general counsel. And the first question the general counsel asked me was, let me start with this. If I can get the New York Times for free, because the New York Times did not have a paywall in 2009, but the Wall Street Journal did. If I can get the New York Times for free, why do I have to pay for the Wall Street Journal? And I looked at him like you're looking at me, and the first thing that came out of my mouth was, well, if I can take the Greyhound for $30, why do I have to pay $300 to go on your airplane?
Well, and also, I would say that not airing out my grievances with online media would be the right format for an interview either. That would create a great candidate experience. So, is that how you answered him?
That's how I answered. I mean, it was very unprofessional on my part, but I just found the question so obtuse. And I was
I don't.
like, well, here's the exact parallel, but for your industry. So,
Oh, I love that. What about? Do you have a good one or like a great one?
oh my God, the best interviews aren't. Um, they have a sensibility, right? So, um, it's interesting that one that I told you where people were on different modalities around what the job was. The actual recruiting process, the team of TA was exceptional.
Hmm.
They had all of their ducks in a row. The operations and the logistics of it, you could just tell it was a well-oiled machine. It was really, really beautiful. They had empathy, they cared, they communicated, they looped back around. I was never left feeling what is next in this process. I think that's an exceptional way. I mean, everyone, and I remember one of my heads of TA a few years back, Danielle Delibero, she was 1000% committed to the candidate experience, whether internal or external. And we threw everything we possibly could into that experience, because how you leave people feeling is always going to be more important than what you leave people saying, right? So for me, that experience is actually a much better one, because how the TA team handled it than, them not being aligned on what the job was. Like the TA experience was far surpassing the what was happening internally. So I would say for all HR teams, especially TA teams, if candidate experience isn't the top thing on your list, everything else falls apart.
Ah, I always ask people, tell me the most talented people you know, so I can either learn from them or potentially hire them. And it sounds like you know a lot of great people in my line of work. So we'll talk, we'll catch up offline. That's awesome. I 100% agree. And those are the things that we try to train in our people as well. The follow up, the responsiveness, the empathy. I love it when I really appreciate anybody that's really great at their job, where they care, they give a shit, they put in the time. I don't care if you're a janitor, a waiter, a recruiter, a VP, a CMO, like doesn't matter. Like if you're great at what you do, I have the highest level of respect for that. And it sounds like you've interacted with some great TA teams out there. What about a favorite question? Do you have a favorite question you like to ask in your interviews?
Well, it's similar to that question that we talked about. I like to know what people are reading. I think that says a lot about a prospective candidate, or a candidate's level of curiosity. And I think curiosity and agility are just table stakes, at least on my teams. And so I really like to know what people are reading. Worst case scenario is you get an answer like, well, I don't really read anything but magazines. But I guess the last book that I read was 50 Shades of Grey. That is an actual quote of somebody that I interviewed.
Ouch.
Um,
Um,
and guess what? I didn't want to hire that person. I got overruled. It was not a great experience with that
they didn't
employee
work out.
afterwards.
All right. So when we come meet up in January, I'm going to bring you a book. I want you to bring me a book, but we're going to answer these questions right now. What are you reading?
Oh my God. Okay, so I just finished reading James McBride. I've read three of his books this year. So The Heaven and Earth Grocery Store was the last one that I read. It's unbelievable. It's so good.
Okay.
And now I'm reading a book called The Tattoo Artist. I try and do all my reading in fiction and all my listening, or all my nonfiction in audio. So The Revenge of the Tipping Point was the last nonfiction book that I read.
I love that. All right. Now I'm going to answer my questions. I want to make sure that, okay. Um, I wrote that down because I want to pick up that book. And I'm kind of like wavering on this a little bit. I read a lot of fiction as a kid, and then I've been strictly nonfiction for like 10, 20 years. Because for me, it's like I want the straight vitamin like right to me. I want to get more knowledgeable. Whereas the nonfiction, I believe there's a ton of value in that, but it's like it's a longer term gain. Whereas like I'm reading this book right now, and I'm getting a lot out of it. I'll tell you, I've got a few books that I'm reading. I'm reading a book called Discipline is Destiny by Ryan Holiday. I love all his works on stoicism, and that book was something I needed to read right now, and I'm really enjoying it. I'm reading Outlive by Peter Attia. I just
Oh,
actually finished it. Another
love
really good
that
book.
book.
I'm reading a book called Blitzscaling because that's something that we're
Yes.
going through as an organization, and
Yep.
so really enjoying that. And then I'm gonna mess up the name because it's for somebody who's coming on the pod, so I want to make sure I get it right. Okay, I am reading a book called Your AI Survival Guide. I just finished it. It's by Sol Rashidi, who's coming on my pod in a couple weeks. And I always like to, if you have a book you've written, I want to read it before the pod. And that's a really good book. It's easy to pick up. It's for every level of kind of technology knowledge. Highly recommend all of those books. I'm getting a lot out of them.
Well, since we're talking about books, and I'm going to give a little plug for, I wrote with a collective of authors a book titled Compassionate Leadership, and it comes out on Valentine's Day. So I'll post about it. But yeah, it was a really incredible time to start thinking and thinking back to 20 years of leadership, not just me and my teams, but how I help other teams and how that bleeds into parenthood too, right? I love how young people think that they're one person at work and another person in real life. And then you realize, oh my God, I've always been the same person. And it was a wonderful journey to really think about, oh my God, I am like the evolution of how you think about things, and what's important and what's not important. Anyway, it was a great time writing. So I'm going to send you a copy.
Oh, I love to hear that, and I love that it's coming out on Valentine's Day. Compassionate leadership, that's great stuff. And you're right. I can totally see how management and parenting. God, there's so many core
So
philosophies
many.
that align there. All right, last hiring question. We talked a little bit about 50-50. You've missed in your career. When you missed, is there a theme you look back at, or is there something you wish you would have done differently?
Yes. When I have missed in my career, it's because I have been allowed to be influenced, usually by the CEO, on
Mm.
somebody that I was lukewarm on.
The hippo, highest paid person's opinion.
I've never heard that. But yes, exactly.
Gosh, yes, I can see that because, and I actually have thought about that a lot in our hiring process. I actually sometimes, especially if it's roles that are close to my role or directly reporting to me, I interview pretty early on. But I'm very careful about what I share in terms of feedback because I know that, whether I like it or not, that could potentially have influence on what other people think. And I'm bringing in people that naturally are a little bit rogue and who are going to have a little bit of a different mindset and challenge my mindset. But I'm also careful to make sure that I'm only sharing what I need to make sure that we're keeping a good interview process and some high level thoughts. But I usually wait for everybody else in the room to kind of give their feedback before I do in any of these types of debriefs. So I think that's really important to be able to stand your ground, especially when it's somebody that might be higher on the totem pole, because just because they're there doesn't mean that they know everything about hiring. Um,
Exactly.
all right, well, listen, I want to go into a little bit of the day in the life stuff. We've got so many book recommendations, so we're going to lay off that. Do you have like a TV show or movie or anything that you've seen that recently you recommend?
Oh my God. Um, okay, so I just watched Man on the Inside with Ted
Oh,
Danson on Netflix.
I'm like 8 episodes in.
Fantastic. My 17-year-old son binged it with me over 2 days. Yeah, and even he got teary eyed. And I don't know if anyone knows 17-year-old boys, they don't cry. So
They don't cry.
it was,
That's
but it's funny, it's clever. I love all the writing that guy has put out in all of his shows. So, and
Well, I'm gonna stop you there because my sister recommended to me. It's Michael Schur, who you're talking
yes,
about. He's done the Good
The Good
Place,
Place.
The Office. He's got a very irreverent style of
Well,
humor. Ted Danson's exceptional in the show. I totally agree with you. It's a very
I
good show.
loved it. And then I'll give you two more. I just watched My Old Ass on Prime,
Okay.
which is just a wonderful coming of age movie. And again, I have three teenagers, so like they're very much on my mind. And I'm watching Dune Prophecy. I don't know why I like this or why I like those Dune movies, but I did, and I'm totally into it.
Yeah. So my Dune journey was I hadn't seen the first one. I kind of knew at a high level what it was about. Then Dune 2 came out. My wife she doesn't like those types of movies. So she was out of town. So I'm like, this is going to be my only opportunity to watch it. And so I asked ChatGPT, can you tell me everything I need to know about Dune 1 so I can understand Dune 2? Because I just didn't have the time to watch both. Got caught up. I watched Dune 2. Really liked it. I was like, wow. And then I got to be honest, I watched the pilot of Dune Prophecy, but I haven't gone back. I don't know what, maybe it's because I did the ChatGPT thing. I don't know enough about the world to be completely baked in on everything. So we'll have to catch up on that. And you'll have to give me your pointers
So,
on
so
that so I
I'm
can
the
get,
person that watches an episode of TV and then I go on to vulture.com to read the recap.
yes.
So I'm like, what did I miss? But I like your
Yeah.
chat GPT
Well,
strategy.
I
That's
felt
a
like I
good
had to
one.
know the backstory going in. Like I felt like I couldn't like start seeing what is his name, Timothy Chalamet and his role and everything, and not know, hey, what did he do in the first movie, so I can be caught up to speed. So really enjoyed it. I love those recommendations. All right, last question before our speed round. If you had to give any advice to 20-year-old Lorna that you didn't know then but that you know now, what would it be?
I have said this to everyone who has asked me this question. The most important career decision you will make is who you decide to partner up with for life. So, who you marry or who you decide is going to be your partner is the most important work decision you're going to make.
I totally agree. I don't even think you need to add to that. I can tell you right now, the idea of happy wife, happy life. Like I looked at my different challenges at work and things like that. And no marriage is perfect, no relationship is perfect. But the fact that I go home to somebody that I respect, that has been helping us manage my 4 kids and the other parts of our life, that will listen to me, that will be supportive of me. I know that nothing that I've accomplished professionally or will accomplish professionally is there without her. I call her the co-captain of the ship, and I agree with you. And I don't know if I got lucky or I was very strategic in my decision making, but so far so good on that. I
I
think it's
love
really
it.
great advice. All right, here's the deal. I'm gonna do the speed round, and I'm gonna jump around a little bit, and this is gonna be, it's gonna really test you. But you've got a lot of mental acuity, so we're gonna see right now. All right, let's start here. What I don't want to say celebrity, but what like famous figure, it could be in business, could be in anything, most emulates your work style?
Um, Most emulates my work style. I don't know if she's a celebrity, but I would say Susie Welch, who used to be the editor in chief of the Harvard Business Review. She
Okay,
wrote
tell us why.
this she wrote this great book called 10 10 10, and it's basically like if you make a decision, like what does that feel like in 10 minutes, in 10 months, in 10 years?
Ooh.
And so I use frameworks like that very often in how I think about things and make decisions. And so I would say probably her.
Okay. Which famous person or celebrity would you least want to work with?
I can't say that.
You can't answer that?
It's a post-election year. I let's just
We're
leave
going
it
to leave
like
that one
that.
go? All right, that's fine. We'll use our imagination. Best thing about going to Cornell?
Oh my God. Slope day.
What's slope day?
Slope day is a day, it's either the last day of classes or the second to last day of classes. And the way it used to run in the 90s was that everyone, that Cornell has this huge slope, and everyone would just congregate, and there would be music, meaning like people's boom boxes or like college bands, like your own band, and people would be eating and drinking and dancing, and it was like an all day festival. It was like a mini Woodstock of Cornell towards the end of the school year.
Oh, love that. Worst part about going to Cornell?
Cornell is, it's no joke. If you get into Harvard, you'll pass no matter what, because hardly anybody gets in, but everybody gets into Cornell. And if you get through Cornell, whew, boy, did you have a fairy godparent. So Cornell's brutal. It is,
My nephew went there. It's very remote out there too, right?
well,
It's very cold.
it's isolating, but
Mhm.
it is a kind of a dog eat dog type of environment.
I can attest to that. My nephew would say the same thing. And they do have one of the best hospitality programs in the world.
Indeed.
Go Big Red. Um, Favorite Puerto Rican food?
Oh my God, there's too many. Pasteles, arroz con gandules. I love me a mezcla sandwich, what people will think is gross, but it's spam, Velveeta, and roasted red peppers. Um, everything. Coquito, it's Christmas time, so coquito and pernil. Um, I love it all. There's like nothing. It's just like that old book, Chicken Soup for the Soul. I think that chicken soup is just all Puerto Rican food.
Oh, I love that. All right, last one. Favorite in this moment Puerto Rican celebrity right now?
Bad Bunny.
See, the thing is, I asked this same question of somebody of Puerto Rican descent a few episodes ago, and I thought they were going to go Bad Bunny, and they went Mark Anthony, and I'm like, I love Mark Anthony, but Mark Anthony, like that's he's later on in his career. Bad Bunny's in the moment right now. Have you been to a Bad Bunny concert?
Yes, I have.
How was that for you?
Amazing.
Oh man, all my reggaeton fans are gonna love this last part. Listen, Lorna, I really appreciate the time to get together. You have so much knowledge. If people listen to this, they're gonna get such value out of this, particularly if they're in TA and HR. I really appreciate you coming on. I'm looking forward to meeting in person.
I had a great time, Oz. Thank you.